data. What are you wearing?
Well, this is Karen. No. So Google Glass, Google used to sponsor my. In fact, when I lost my funding from Stanford, Google came along and picked it up. So I was a very sweet spot for that. So it was totally unrelated, but once the team were looking for people to brainstorm ideas before these were released publicly, they invited me down to cook up some, and they guess they liked some of the ideas. So right now I get updates on my son's blood glucose levels. He's type 1 diabetic on Glass. So that's why I actually wear them all the time.
She's one of the few people in the whole world who's actually written a useful application for your Glass. I mean, really, we are lucky to have her here. Vivienne, you talked about the difference between pitching a deal as a man and a woman, which is a really unique perspective. Lorenzo, you said you encountered no issues with investors when you were pitching your deals as a gay man. How did it come up?
Well, I personally didn't. And, it's hard to say whether or not there was ever in the room someone who might have had something negative, thought something negative, or had something negative to say about it. It's just a very different. It's in the midst of an environment that is very much unlike many other places in America and in the world. But there is the interesting thing. So I personally didn't see that reaction, and I never really worried about it. I remember showing up at functions with my partner, with investors and whatnot, and making references just like anybody would have made those references. But what I started noticing was others who had a very different outlook on this, and often not necessarily, more founded in fear and in unknown reaction. And again, in the misunderstanding of the negativity that was actually coming from the perpetuation of that. And also the fact that there was, very interestingly, and we've seen it a lot, a lack of openly active LGBT individual in their community in certain areas of business, including venture capital, including certain financial services, and one of the things was you start to wonder how much of it is self-segregation and how much of it is actually the perpetuation of that good old boys club, in a sense that leads people to hide their identity and to stay in the professional closet. And there was just too much that was being wasted, in our opinion, in terms of the good that could come from people being visible. Successful entrepreneurs, people that were building great companies, people that were building great value, people that in a lot of ways, and we're seeing it now, I think in the last decade, certainly this is happening, sort of there's a little bit of a culture happening of the entrepreneur as a hero. Sort of the really successful entrepreneurs. There would be so much good coming from very visible heroes who are gay, heroes to the rest of society, and if we could do something to help people who were already building great companies, who were already on their path to add enormous value to society, to completely disrupt the stereotype and the preconceived notions that people would have about LGBT people, there was enormous value to do that.
Joel, you kind of made a joke about starting a very gay business. That's a question that I think the audience might be interested in thinking about. Is there opportunity there? So no one has ever pointed a finger at straight white men starting fantasy football businesses. There are too many of them, and they're too focused on men. But there is some buzz in the press right now that the successful women entrepreneurs are all starting businesses that are focused on women. And Inc. magazine, in the article I referred to, even sort of said, well, we cut our successful gay entrepreneurs with Grindr. Like, Is that the way communities get into entrepreneurship, by serving their own community?
Well, I think it's certainly one way, and I think that's where something like StartOut can really help. I mean, I would say that, you know, I certainly have I have faced some discrimination in the workplace years ago more than recently, you know, but I also did banking, and I was worked for one of the big management consulting firms. So, you know, those are environments where you're probably a little more likely to see that, especially with some of your clients. You know, lately I would say I really haven't faced much discrimination, and I wonder, you know, if part of that is self-selecting. I mean, you kind of talk about, you know, people putting themselves in the closet or being open. I'm not sure that I'm in situations where it's more likely for me to be discriminated against, because I have been open about being gay, you know, my entire career. I've always kind of taken the attitude that if somebody doesn't like it, I can take my resume and I can go somewhere else. And so, you know, I think that perhaps, you know, I haven't seen discrimination for a while because, you know, if it's going to be an issue, it's going to surface very quickly, and people probably move on. So I just am not in those situations. As far as, you know, kind of creating something for the gay community, you know, I don't know if a used furniture business is, you know, geared toward antique furniture is geared toward gays as far as just being gay, but it had modern things that went with it. That was the touch. So it wasn't just old things. It had a cool name, a dog and a duck. Which actually came about by a bunch of people being drunk at my house over a dinner party, and the dog was in the corner playing with a rubber duck. So marketing 101. We actually went out and surveyed people. We had a list of names. We asked them what they associate it with. We went back 3 days later, asked them which names they remembered. I mean, we did all this marketing stuff on the name, and it stuck. So my plates on my SUV here still say that. Anyway, you know, I think that's an interesting thing. I know StartOut is thinking about, you know, starting a fund for, you know, entrepreneurs here in Chicago, and there's certainly a lot of venture capital money in Chicago. About 40% of ECD's venture capital is local. You know, Drive Capital just announced that they're going to have about $250 million fund, you know, here in the Midwest, not necessarily Chicago. So there's a lot of venture capital, but I wonder, you know, if you create a business that really targets the gay and lesbian community, at that point, is that a conversation, even if they're comfortable with you being gay, where as an investor, I'm not sure if they would be as comfortable just because they may not be as familiar with the market, they may not be as familiar with the product. So it might just be something around investing that, you know, they know less about, and might be a harder investment to make. So I think actually having a fund that, you know, backs gay and lesbian entrepreneurs, whether they're focused on that marketplace or not, is a great idea. You know, but you know, like I said, at the end of the day, you know, I think if you have a great product, regardless of who your market is, that's the key. Finding things besides Grindr, and, you know. There's a lot of Grindr alternatives out there. How they all exist, I don't know. But you know,
and some of them are even for straight people.
There are. I know. And women. So you know.
I wonder, is there anybody on those networks? Because I've never found. Never mind.
Oh, no, I had a business meeting the other day, and I walked in on time, and the guy was like, "Oh shoot, I didn't have time to get on Scruff," and I'm like. Seriously? I'm like, okay.
You know, you talk about the market, and we've talked about sort of the reaction of investors. We've talked about the reaction of potentially employees. Vivienne or Lorenzo, have you had any instance where it affected your ability to get customers? Vivienne, you're in a deep science field. Most of the customers are men, for sure. Has it ever been an issue in trusting your company as a customer?
Well, the one humorous thing I can say, so I did say this, that I'm on top of one of my tech companies that I co-founded, still going on. I'm also the chief scientist of a company called Guild. I design algorithms that basically figure out how good everyone here is their job from public data, and then we make recommendations to our customers about hiring you. So the interesting thing is that many of our biggest customers, and the ones that would have the biggest impact, here I can't share their name, but they don't need us to find people. You know, we're not helping them get more resumes. They're drowning in resumes. one of the things that very upfront they want from us is to be able to find what they call diversity candidates, which I'm not thrilled with the terminology, but they actively really want to. And you see their very well-known founders that sometimes spend unfathomably large sums of money on messaging apps out there walking down Market Street during Pride. And the reason they're using Guild is because they want to reach people like this. But at the same time, a lot of startups, not using us directly, but using recruiters that use our technology, they tell them straight up, I want a 20-year-old man, white, period. Go find him for me. You know, the age, the sex, everything discrimination. And they don't see it that way. It's positive discrimination. It's this sort of not all that novel idea, but it's got some growth to it nowadays, which is simply that no one's actively discriminating against anyone. You just want to hang out with people like you. Well, the problem is, if the industry is a certain way to start with, and you have this continuous positive discrimination, well, then everyone stays just like you. And it's really pernicious at the startup level, where it's really, it's a bunch of guys out of Stanford or MIT, and they want to just hang out with their frat brothers or their dinner club brothers or whatever the local version is. And there's this narrow little definition of what actually is acceptable diversity, but really they want to understand the person they're with. And quite frankly, I was asked this before, will Google, what would happen? So the New York Times reporter said, are you telling me Google wouldn't go nuts if you found them this amazing black lesbian engineer? Yeah, actually, they would be thrilled. They'd be willing to pay for licenses for just one hire like that. But startups, no, that's not how they're approaching the world. And then I just wanted to finish with one last idea, which was, it was just in reference to what you'd said earlier, which is that I've used this terminology of the fashion tech ghetto before. And for me, it's less about the founders and more about that's the only place people feel confident investing money is in believing, oh, you know that space. Well, people can know things other than these traditional identifiers.
And one of the problems, what you call positive discrimination, which is a real problem, sometimes comes out of social phenomena that are actually not malicious, and especially really young startups. And I'll tell you, my first company had an unreasonable amount of gay people in them. By any virtue of the measure of what should have been. But the reason is that when you are a really young startup with a really small group of people, it's you go talk to the people that you know, you go talk to the people that you hang out with, and you have no budgets to go and hire someone to find talent, and until you actually get to the point where you get thousands of resumes, and then you actually have a responsibility to fight against that current. You actually find exactly those situations that happen in one direction or another.
So, I think panel discussions are most interesting when driven by the interests of the audience. So if you guys have questions, jump in and let us know.